You think you decided to change. Somewhere in your head there's a moment you could point to, a choice, an argument you finally won with yourself, a click. So try to find it. Really try. Most people who've lived through something big can't locate that instant anywhere. They remember who they were before. They remember who they became after. The middle is just gone. In a moment, I'll show you what's actually happening in that missing middle. Not a new belief arriving, but something closer to your attention quietly rearranging itself, deciding what counts and what doesn't, without ever asking your permission. And by the end, I want to show you the one move that actually finishes this. A strange, almost stingy kind of giving up, the last thing that has to happen before any of it holds for good. But first, the part people always skip when they tell this story. Before anything new arrives, the old thing goes numb. That's the part people skip when they tell the story later. They talk about the light, the answer, the moment it all made sense. But first, almost always, there's a flattening. The world stops glowing. Things that used to explain themselves, why you get up, why you keep going, stop explaining themselves. One man described it plainly. Life had been enchanting, and then it was just sober. Then more than sober, then dead. Not sad, dead. The questions why and what next started pressing in on him, uninvited, over and over. That's not a new belief arriving. That's an old structure losing its grip on the room. So if the light isn't first, what is? Here's where I think the real story starts. Not in what you believe, but in what you're attending to. Your mind is doing something constant and mostly invisible. It's sorting reality into foreground and background. Most of what's true about your life right now, you're not thinking about. You've pushed it to the edges because something else is more pressing. That sorting isn't neutral. It's the actual architecture of who you are on a given day. And here's the part that matters. When that sorting changes, when something that used to sit quietly in your peripheral vision suddenly won't stay there anymore, you don't get to choose that. It just stops being ignorable. Now picture that shift not as a single event, but as the last visible motion of something much longer. A mind is a system of ideas, each one pulling, pushing, checking, reinforcing the others, mostly holding steady. That steadiness can look like conviction for years, but underneath, strain accumulates. Then one perception, one jolt, one moment that lays the whole structure bare, and the entire fabric falls together at once, not because a better argument arrived, because the tension had nowhere left to go. Violent emotional shocks are especially good at this. They rearrange things fast, and they rarely leave what they touch unchanged. What looked sudden from outside was actually the end of a very long process no one was watching. And this is where the awe comes in, because when the rearrangement finishes, people don't usually report new facts. They report a new world. The same sun, the same grass, the same street they've walked 1,000 times. One convert said an appearance of newness beautified every object. The opposite almost exactly of that dreadful flatness from before. Jonathan Edwards described a calm, sweet cast of glory settling over almost everything he looked at. Another put it simpler still, like a man born blind, suddenly opening his eyes to daylight. He can see, but he can't define the light bathing him. Nothing outside them had changed. So if the world looks different without becoming different, ask yourself, what actually moved? Now, I want to take the strongest counterargument seriously because it deserves that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe conviction really is built on reason. Maybe treating this as pure attention and belonging strips people of the dignity of having actually thought their way to something true. There's a version of this argument built on real observation, not mysticism. Conversion, studied carefully, often looks like ordinary adolescent maturation, the normal passage out of a child's small universe into a wider adult one, just compressed. Not magic, development. But notice what that account still says caused the shift. Not logic, not a superior argument. A crisis, a moment that intensified and shortened a process already underway. Even the most rational reading of conversion still locates the trigger in timing, not in truth. So where does that leave you, if you've lived through this? I think it leaves you at a harder question than whether you were right. It leaves you asking what you are actually willing to give up. Because the last move in real transformation isn't agreement, it's surrender, and a specific, almost stingy kind of surrender. As long as you keep one secret insurance policy, one safeguard tucked away in case the new thing doesn't hold, the old self hasn't actually let go. Fear still stands sentinel at the door. But when you give something up for good, completely, with no fallback, something in you rolls over into an entirely different balance. You start living from a new center, not because you won an argument with yourself, because you finally stopped hedging. I'm genuinely curious how this lands for you. When you think back on your own turn, was there a moment you can name where you stopped hedging? Tell me, I'd like to know. Here's the thing converts keep saying, across centuries, in completely different words. It wasn't a decision, it was a seeing. One described it like a bandage falling from his eyes, and then, not just one bandage, but the whole manifold of bandages he'd grown up wearing, disappearing one after another, like ice melting under a rising sun. Another said he felt things before he understood them, hidden movements, more rapid than thought, that shook him and turned his soul in another direction. That's the compass from the start of all this. It doesn't argue its way to north. It trembles for a long time, near one direction. Under strain, nobody sees. Then it simply stops trembling. It locks somewhere else. You didn't do that. Something in you already had. So stop asking whether what happened to you needs your permission to be real. The needle already turned. That part is finished, and no amount of doubting it will turn it back. The only honest question left isn't whether to believe what you now see. It's whether you can even remember, clearly, how you used to see before. Try it. Try to reconstruct the old flatness, the old meaning, the old certainty from the inside, the way it actually felt to live there. Notice how it slips. That's not forgetfulness. That's the new center of gravity, holding. If you've ever tried to go back and found you couldn't quite get there, I'd love to hear what that felt like for you. Leave it below.